Hi, this is Chris Brown, and today we're going to talk about Assembly Bill 5. California Assembly Bill 5 is almost certainly going to be tied up in courts for years. The outcome, I don't know. Me personally, I think that it's a pretty reasonable law. It doesn't really depart that much from existing federal and state requirements. But that said, who knows how this will play out in the long run. But the important part for employers to just take away from all of this right now is that even though Assembly Bill 5, which regulates the ability to hire and utilize independent contractors in the state of California, even though that law is definitely geared towards these, so-called gig economy businesses, it's not that simple. It doesn't just impact them. They couldn't just focus in on those specific businesses. Instead, what they did with Assembly Bill 5 is they just strengthened it, and they didn't actually strengthen it by that much, because all of these businesses that were relying upon these so-called independent contractors for all these years, it was just, in my opinion, barely, passing muster under existing law. So it's not that gigantic of a change. But because it affects all employers in California, not just Uber and Lyft, it's something that you need to think about. Now, if you're a company that never uses independent contractors, that doesn't hire freelancers, that doesn't subcontract things out, then you don't have to worry about it. It's always been safest when you're not sure just to bring someone in as an employee. And if you're a multi-state employer, that's true in every state. There's existing federal law on this. This isn't just a California thing. The Fair Labor Standards Act, under the economic reality test, which has been around for a long time, does the exact same thing. It presumes that a worker is an employee, unless by virtue of economic reality, they operate an independent business of their own. The IRS Factor 20 test assumes that someone is an employee. There have been plenty of employers over the years who have gotten in plenty of trouble under existing law for classifying people as independent contractors who really should have been employees. What AB-5, in my view, attempts to do is provide just a little more ammunition for, in this case, the state, to go after those misclassifications because they provide, one, a simpler test and stronger penalties when someone is misclassified. So under Assembly Bill 5, the legislature basically codified what's called the ABC test, which is a result of a California Supreme Court case a number of years ago called the Dynamax case. And under the ABC test, we're looking at 3 factors. And unlike the economic reality test from the Fair Labor Standards Act, where you've got, all of these factors and no single factor is controlling, and it's not simple, they're going to weigh all of them and it's going to be the preponderance. The ABC test, you got to pass all 3, and it's pretty straightforward. So I think from the standpoint of trying to stay compliant, the ABC test has some real positives because there's less ambiguity. Under the economic reality test or the IRS Factor 20 test, people in good faith can look at that and disagree. And because we don't know exactly which factor is going to be controlling in those tests, it can be kind of tough. Under the ABC test, it's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to throw up the ABC test now and the factors that are in the ABC test. And let me just kind of go over those for you. The first factor, A, is that the worker is free from the control and direction of the hiring entity in connection with the performance of the work, both under the contract for the performance of the work and in fact. So when they say "and in fact," what they're saying there is you can't just have a contract that makes it sound like someone's free to operate independently. They have to really be independent. I think this is really targeting businesses who have used contracts and other documents to try and paper over compliance issues and say that they're technically in compliance, even though in reality they're providing a degree of control over that worker that should make them an employee. So B, that the worker performs work that is outside the usual course of the hiring entity's business. So this one is hugely problematic for some of those businesses that they're definitely targeting with this law. I kind of think, And of course, Uber argues differently, and I don't want to get into a big fight with Uber. Uber argues that they're just a technology platform that, has an app, and that all the drivers are independent businesses. I view Uber as a way of getting around. I don't view it as an app. I view it as a transportation service. And I think the state and the courts under AB-5 are likely to view it that way as well. And I'm not picking on Uber. I'm just saying that if you look at this rule, they're kind of clearly targeting that if your business is getting people around and the people who you're hiring to do the getting folks around aren't your employees, that's going to be problematic under AB-5. As I mentioned, I think Uber's argument is going to be, well, we're not a transportation company. We're just a ride-sharing platform. We're just software. But I don't personally think that Uber would have this sky-high valuation if all they were was an app. I think that they're viewed by lots of investors, consumers, other businesses as being in the transportation business. And if you look at AB-5 and how they codify the ABC test, I think that they would have a real debate on Part B. C is that the worker is customarily engaged in an independently established trade, occupation, or business of the same nature as the work performed. So what they're saying here is that the subcontractor has to have a legitimate business of their own. And this is where I think a lot of businesses have exposure when they hire so-called independent contractors or freelancers, as they're often referred to. And this is true under the economic reality test from the DOL and under AB-5. Many times a business will just bring someone in to work on a project. They don't want to put them on the payroll. They don't want to provide benefits, so they call them an independent contractor or freelancer. The big question you're going to have to ask yourself under AB-5 is, does this person legitimately operate a business of their own? Do they have other customers? Do they have a separate work site? Do they advertise their business? Do they compete with other businesses for work? Or is it someone who's just working for you as an independent contractor? And I think there's, shades of gray there. I don't think it's always going to be crystal clear one way or the other, but I definitely see big exposure for California employers who hire independent contractors or freelancers under this law, because that ABC test is pretty straightforward now. It's a lot simpler than the DOL economic reality test, and I think it is definitely going to make it easier for people to bring claims that they were misclassified as independent contractors when they should have been employees. Now, you might ask, well, why should someone care? If they're getting paid either way, what's the difference? Well, of course, as an independent contractor, the company's not paying matching taxes, they're not providing unemployment insurance, they're not providing workers' comp, they're not providing health insurance or other fringe benefits, they're not providing reimbursements for mileage or things like that. So someone may have a very strong incentive who has been classified as an independent contractor and takes a look at how much expense they're personally bearing or how many things they're not getting to go to court and argue that they should have been classified as an employee under the ABC test as codified under Assembly Bill 5. And so if you've got independent contractors, if you've got freelancers, it might be a really good time to go and take a look and figure out if maybe you should hire those folks on as employees. A lot of times employers are concerned about that because they feel like they're maybe admitting that they did something wrong. I don't know that that's the case here because there's been a change in the law. You might have had exposure under the existing rules, but it's certainly a lot easier when there's a change in the law to go to that worker and say, hey, because of this change in the law, we'd really like to bring you on payroll as an employee just to make sure that everything's on the up and up. And I don't think that creates a lot of additional exposure for you that you don't already have under the old rules, and it certainly will reduce your exposure under AB-5. And I get that a lot of companies aren't going to want to do that, but this law is definitely heavily biased towards a worker being classified as an employee rather than as an independent contractor. Now, there's a bunch of special rules and exceptions in AB-5 that deal with particular types of workers in particular industries, like construction and trucking and other things like that. I'm just talking here about sort of general independent contractors or freelancers. You might want to look at the specific rules. We work with a lot of construction companies, and in the construction section, there's very specific rules that apply regarding what has to be in contracts and indemnification agreements, carrying your own insurance, all that other sort of stuff that comes into play on whether or not someone can be classified as an independent contractor when they're doing construction work. But a lot of our California clients, have got that freelancer or two who helps them out with IT work or something that, they don't want to hire that person as an employee. But under AB-5, you may want to rethink that because there's definitely additional exposure. And of course, this is going to go to court and it's going to be tied up for several years. But I don't know, when I'm not sure, I try to take the cautious approach. And I've said that for years. If you're not sure, make them an employee. AB-5 gives you even more of a reason to make them an employee. And if you're not in California, yes, the economic reality test under the Fair Labor Standards Act isn't quite as strict as this new ABC test under AB-5, but they're still looking at the same stuff. And there have been plenty of employers all over the country who have gotten busted for misclassification under the existing economic reality test. So I wouldn't ignore this just because it's a California thing. And I've also seen that other states are looking at this and saying, yeah, we want to make it tougher too, and apply a similar standard. So I expect that, like so many things that start in California, this will spread to other parts of the country as well.